So I'd like to thank Quarterly Dharma Friends for organizing the talk, and also North Idaho College for hosting it. And let's just take a minute, lower your eyes, and let's generate our motivation. Because we often just do things without knowing why we're doing them, but now is a good time to do something intentionally. And so let's place the sharing that we're about to do within the context of being a benefit to all living beings. Through being able to identify and free ourselves from our faults, and being able to recognize and enhance our good qualities. And to really do this for the benefit of all living beings, not just for our own selves. Okay. So I think that setting of the motivation to placing it within the context of being a benefit to all beings is very important. Susan mentioned that we have our own proclivities here in the West. And one of them is, well, all beings have this. All beings think, you know, I'm number one, I'm most important. But we have a special brand of self-centeredness here in the U.S. Yeah, and you know, I remember coming back from Asia and being in the U.S. and there's a magazine called Self. You know, in Asia you wouldn't see a magazine called Self. You know, so all this emphasis here on the self and being an individual. So we can't be like everybody else. We have to be an individual, but we have to be an individual in the same way that everybody else is an individual. Okay? So we have to be an individual. We have to conform in our being an individual. Are you getting what I mean? Okay? And so we have to be individualistic enough so that we don't do everything like everybody else, but we really have to kind of fit in with what everybody else is doing. We don't want to be too far out either. But we don't want to be just like everybody else because we're supposed to be unique. So it gets a little crazy making, to say the least. And especially all this emphasis on me and my pleasure, and my happiness, and my life, and my decisions, and my choices, my preferences. I mean, even in our computers, it's, you know, my email. It's not just email. My email, my photos, my pics, iPod, iPad. It's all about I and my and me and mine, and you know, we're like so incredibly focused on the self. And yet, focusing on the self like this actually makes us quite confused and unhappy. You know, it's shrouded, it's set forth as, you know, if you focus on yourself, then you're really going to be happy. You know, try and get everything you want, you need. That's the key to happiness. But actually, in fact, what happens is we get quite confused, and the focus on ourself makes us overly sensitive. And then we get depressed. And we're so focused on my feelings and my emotions. Anybody else like me, you know? My mother used to call me Sarah Bernhardt when I was a kid. You know? I guess I was pretty theatrical about my emotions. My feelings. Yeah. And they're the most important thing in the whole entire world. And so all this focus on the self, actually, it doesn't make us happy. We become very super sensitive to everything that happens around me. Every way somebody looks at me, every word they use, how they walk when they walk past me. I'm filtering everything in the universe through how it relates to me, because I just coincidentally happen to be the center of this universe. And everything should correspond with what I want. And if it doesn't, I'm going to go out and protest. So this emphasis on the self really makes us so oversensitive. Everything filtered through how it relates to me. And then, because of all this self-focus too, we become very self-critical and self-deprecating. And we tend to have, as a culture, we're a culture of people with low self-esteem. For all of our arrogance, underneath it, there's a lot of low self-esteem. I mean, why are people arrogant? It's because they don't really believe in themselves. When we believe in ourselves, we don't have to be arrogant. When we have self-confidence, we can be humble. But why are we always, touting me? Here I am. Go in and apply for a job, or, you apply to go to school. And it's always, well, I have all these abilities, even when we don't. I remember when my niece was applying for college, she had to write an essay, and something about herself, something about, self. And so I said, well, talk about your good qualities and talk about the things you have difficulty with. And they got really, she got really upset with me. We don't talk about the things we have difficulty with, because we have to put ourselves forth as a number one perfect. Whereas in a lot of other cultures, you don't put yourself forth like that. You put yourself forth as a member of a community, an interdependent member of a community who depends on others, who helps others. But we always think we need to put ourselves forth as number one who does everything well. We're going to beat everybody else. We're better than everybody else. You should accept me in the college. You should give me the job. You should promote me. And so all this way of thinking that we have to be number one makes us very self-critical, because how many people can be number one? One. Okay? So if you're number two, then you're not good enough. This is the message we often get. And especially now, where it's things are so global, we're competing with many more people to be number one. In ancient times, it was easy to be the best singer because maybe there were 40 people in your village. Or 100 people in your village. But now, to be the best singer, you have to be better than who knows how many other people. So what all this turns into is we think, well, I'm just insufficient. I'm not good enough. Whatever I do isn't good enough. all those people are good enough. They get the recognition, they get the promotions, they get this, that. But me, forget it. Yeah. So we have a lot of difficulty with low self-esteem. Is this ringing any bells with you? You people are looking kind of puzzled. Yeah. I was at a conference once with a bunch of scientists who were meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And this topic of low self-esteem came up. And His Holiness didn't get it. He was scratching his head, and saying, who has low self-esteem? Because he was in the room with, all these quite well-known scientists who were all specialists and PhDs and big names. And all these people look at each other when His Holiness said, who has low self-esteem? And they all kind of shyly look at each other and say, I do. And His Holiness was so shocked. He said, but you're so successful. Why do you have low self-esteem? Yeah, he was so puzzled by that. And yet, somehow, all of the Westerners in the group, we all understood why we all had low self-esteem. We started doing kind of a brainstorming session about different factors in our culture that lead us to have that view of ourselves. But it is really quite a prevalent view. And I think it goes hand in hand with all this focus on the self. So the focus on the self, instead of bringing more happiness, brings more unhappiness. Because I remember after this meeting with the scientists, listening to His Holiness talk in San Francisco, and he started talking about low self-esteem, and he brought up compassion as an antidote for low self-esteem. And compassion is wanting living beings to be free of suffering and its causes. And I remember when he first said compassion, he was talking about compassion as a way to improve your own feelings about yourself. I was thinking, oh man, what are you talking about? If we don't like ourselves, how can we have compassion for anybody else? I thought, maybe you don't get it. But since His Holiness is my teacher, I don't just dismiss it when I don't get it, or I think he doesn't get it. I think probably maybe it's me that doesn't get it. So let's keep thinking about this. So I kept thinking about it and observing, and then I really saw, yeah, because when we have compassion, our attention is placed on others. And we no longer have this self-centered focus that just picks faults on ourselves and picks at ourselves so much. Instead, our focus is on the situation of others. Now, I don't want to propound this as a way of ignoring ourselves, okay? Because clearly, we have to pay attention to ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves. We don't ignore our faults. We also don't ignore our good qualities. But the idea is that rather than just be focused on me, I, mine, and mine, we open ourselves up and see that there's this whole universe full of living beings who are exactly like us, wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And we're one of those living beings. And to the extent that we can offer service and be of benefit to others, yes, we are important. But we are not important in the sense of my way is right, my happiness is the most important thing. Okay? you getting what I'm saying? And as I look at the American political scenery now, this whole emphasis on self I think it lies very much behind all this acrimony that you hear in the political discourse now. You know, when I was young, way back with the dinosaurs, people in public life didn't speak to each other with the kind of rudeness that goes on now. I mean, I'm really rather shocked at what what politicians say, what people on the media say, some of these talk show people and all. To me, it's really like, my goodness, how did you learn to talk to other people that way? But if you see, you know, what lies behind it is this view of me and my way, and my way is the right way. As they say, my way or the highway. And then it just brings so much discord because we lose the ability to think of the welfare of a group and think only for our own welfare. But the thing is that we live together with others. And if we don't think of the welfare of the group, we're going to be living together with a lot of unhappy people. And what happens when we live with unhappy people? Is living with other unhappy people going to make you happy? No. Okay? So just looking out for our own welfare and trying to get our own way without caring for the benefit of all of society is in the end going to make us more unhappy. So His Holiness Dalai Lama always says, if you want to be selfish, be wisely selfish and take care of others. Because if we take care of others, it relieves that painful emphasis on the self. And then we can create happiness with the people that we're around. And when we live with people who are content, it's much more pleasant for us. I remember living in Seattle some years ago, and they wanted to vote on a school bond for, raising taxes for schools. And the people who had kids were okay with the school bond. But the people who didn't have kids, who were wealthier, didn't want to pay more taxes for the education of other people's children. They thought, it's other people's kids. They should pay the money. I worked hard. I made my living. I live in a rich neighborhood. I don't want to give up any money for other people's education. But what happens when the society as a whole doesn't support the education of all children? This is an issue right now in our country, isn't it? They're slashing the budget, especially for Head Start, which is such an incredibly useful program for people. But my point is, you cut help to the schools, and then the kids no longer have extracurricular activities, and they don't have a good education. Then what are the kids going to do after school? They get into mischief. Drink, drugs, break into houses. Whose houses are they going to break into? The houses of the wealthy people who voted against the school bond. You're not going to break into the house of somebody who's poor if you want to rip something off. Yeah? But those people were so self-centered and short-sighted that they couldn't see that, by paying a little bit more in taxes, having better education for the kids, you're going to cut the crime rate. But But they wouldn't pay taxes for the education. When it came time to building prisons, they're very happy. And our country is still like that, isn't it? We're very happy to throw people in prison and incarcerate them, but we don't want to give them a good education. And we don't see the relationship between taking care of children and the prison rate. It's like, duh, you know? There's a connection here. There's a connection here. So this always just thinking about me and my money, and I don't want to share it with anybody else. Yeah. It creates an attitude, or it creates a situation in society where you have a lot of people who are not happy, and people who don't have equal opportunity for education. And then what's going to happen? You have more conflict in society. I mean, as we're just seeing through Arab Spring, you know, what are people wanting? They're wanting dignity and self-respect and better education and better opportunities. Yeah. So the dictators kept putting them down for their own benefit, but then it backfires in the end. Because the point is that we always live together with others. And if we only take care of ourselves, we're not going to be happy. Yeah. And if we really look inside, you know, if you look inside yourself at the times that you were happiest in your life, okay, if you think of times when you were very happy in your life, was it times when you got the material possessions that you wanted? Or was it times when you had a close connection with other people? What brings you more joy? Having material possessions and money, or being connected to other people? Yeah? I never heard of anybody on their deathbed dying with regret that they didn't work more overtime. You know? But I do hear of people on their deathbed dying with regret that they didn't love more, and that they didn't share more, and with regret that they were cruel to other people. Okay? So you can see, you know, when we let the self-centered attitude run the show, it actually makes us much more miserable. Whereas when we, you know, really work to open our heart and open our mind and care for other living beings, you know, it creates goodwill, you know. When we give to others, it creates goodwill for ourselves. Then we live amongst people who are happy. Instead of spending so much money on troops and armaments, if we spent it on schools and clinics, why don't we do that as a country? We will have many more friends internationally if we did that. You know, our personal style and our national style are very similar. You know, you do something I don't like, I'm going to make you miserable until you decide to do it my way. Does it work? When you're mad at somebody because they aren't doing what you want them to do, and you carry on in your anger and yell and scream and insult them and throw things, are they going to want to make you happy? When we act, you know, when other people act that way towards us, do we want to make their life pleasant? No. But somehow we think that if I get angry enough and say enough mean, cruel things, then they'll decide that they really love me and they'll do things my way. You know, and our national policy is, I'll balm you, until you decide that we're the good guys. Do things our way. You know, it doesn't work on an individual level, it doesn't work on an international level either. Yeah. And yet we keep doing the same dumb things again and again, don't we? You know, as human beings who can invent so many incredible technological things and scientific things, on an interpersonal level and how to get along with each other, we are so foolish and stupid. Don't you think? Yeah. And so if we really cultivate this heart that respects others and takes care of others and wants the best for others, and acts in a way that takes everybody's needs and concerns into consideration, then we're going to live together with people who are a lot happier. And then we're going to be happier. It doesn't have to be so difficult, but we have a way of making it very difficult. So I'm not talking about that we have to sacrifice everything for everybody and make ourselves totally miserable, and unless we are miserable and suffering, we're not truly compassionate. Okay, I'm not saying that at all. That kind of view of compassion is not a Buddhist perspective. In a Buddhist perspective, compassion wants everybody to be free of suffering. And we're one of everybody. So we also want ourselves to be free of suffering. It's not about self-torture. Okay. But, you know, we are one of everybody. So we do have to take care of ourselves. But we are not everybody. We're only one of everybody. So we have to take care of everybody else too. And there's something quite special, I think, when we focus on giving to others. I think there's some real satisfaction that comes in our hearts. When you've done something kind for somebody else, do you feel some kind of satisfaction that you don't feel when, you know, it's your birthday and you get all the presents? Yeah. When we give to others, there's a special kind of satisfaction that we don't feel on other occasions. And so I think it's important that as adults we cultivate that kind of happiness and satisfaction, and that we teach it to children as well. So instead of just teaching kids about, you know, me, I, my, and mine, you know, teach kids how to derive happiness and pleasure from giving happiness to others. Because all this is learned. All this is learned. What we find is bringing happiness and what we find is bringing suffering. It's all things we learn. It's conditioned stuff. So if we start learning this when we're young, and if as adults we model it and teach it to kids, you know, then they learn to feel happy and content when they help other people. And so we don't have to help others in huge, enormous ways. If we can, that's great. Yeah. But we shouldn't feel inferior or put ourselves down, thinking, oh, well, you know, I have to have $1 million in order to really do something beneficial for somebody else. That's not true. Yeah. There's so many small ways we can be of help to others. Especially in our family, in the classroom, in our work environment. Yeah, we're the people living there, interacting with other people there. We can give them happiness, or we can cause them a lot of suffering. And sometimes small gestures of goodwill can really be very, very powerful things. Very powerful things. And sometimes those gestures of goodwill come easily, and sometimes we have to nudge ourselves a little bit. And sometimes they're the opposite from what our self-centered mind wants to do. I remember hearing of a story of some other people who were also students of the same Buddhist teacher. One of my Buddhist teachers, they were also his students. And they were in a situation where their car, was parked outside, and it got scratched. And of course, whoever scratched the car didn't leave a message on it saying, "Sorry, I scratched your car." They just ignored it. But they were able to tell by the where the scratch was and the color of the scratch that it was actually their neighbor's car who had scratched it. So they went to talk to this neighbor and, confronted him. Don't you love that, how we confront people nowadays? We don't talk with them. We don't discuss. We confront. Okay. So they confronted him. And, he was very unhappy. He was an older man. And he, was very unhappy. But then somehow reluctantly, okay, I'll fix it, And, I'll fix it. But, he wasn't very happy at all. Then, a couple of months later, the car scratched again. Yeah. Say, doing the research, they figured out it was this same neighbor. And I thought, uh-oh, what are we going to do now? Yeah. So they talked about it, and they said, well, what would our teacher do? What would our teacher do? And our teacher has a very unique personality. And they said, he would go give the guy a present. So this older man played golf. So they went out and they got some golf balls. And they went over to his house and, rang the doorbell. And the guy didn't come for a long time. And then, they rang it again. And then finally the guy opens the door. Yeah, what do you guys want? And they just said, oh, we brought you a gift, and handed him the golf balls. And the guy took them and closed the door, and that was the end of it. Yeah. And so they went back home and they said, okay, well, we just tried to extend some kindness to this person. And then a little while later, half an hour later, their doorbell rings, and the old man comes and talks to them and apologizes, and yeah. So it was a situation where, you extend some kindness, even to somebody who, they could have gone over, bang, 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 you bashed our car again, you beep, 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 But they didn't do that. They extended some kindness, and that touched the man's heart. Yeah, touched the guy's heart, so that he could come over and apologize. So I think a lot of, different ways, if we just look at other living beings and small things we can do for them, small ways we can help. Where instead of just being so focused on ourselves, it can really bring a lot of goodwill. A lot of people, when we have friends or relatives in the hospital, we don't really like going to visit them in the hospital. Any of you feel uncomfortable going to visit somebody in a hospital? Some people do, some people don't. But for the people who do, it's like, the hospital gives me the creeps. Why? Because I think it reminds us that our turn is coming and someday we'll be in the hospital. We don't like to think about that. Okay. So, okay, Aunt Ethel, Uncle George, they're in the hospital. I'll send some flowers, but I won't go visit. So sending flowers is good, but you know, a personal visit might actually touch somebody more and help them to feel loved and cared for. But we have to get over our reluctance, you know, and our feeling of being ill at ease, being in a hospital, and think about the situation of the other person. And then extend ourselves. And extend ourselves, but without hope of any reward. Because sometimes, you know, our ego is very, very tricky. And we do something kind for others. And inside we have a little checklist of, okay, I've done 3 kind things for you so far. I think you owe me something by now. At least a thank you. But instead of, you know, having expectations like that and keeping tabs, to try and give and make the act of giving the thing that brings us delight. Not the appreciation, not the thanks, but just the act of giving that we do no matter what somebody else does with our gift. Okay? Because indeed it is the act of giving that is the thing that brings good feelings, isn't it? Whereas, you know, if we're giving, but then we're waiting for something in return, then somehow our motivation, you know, how much are we really giving for the joy of giving and for the benefit of others, and how much are we kind of doing bribery? You know what I mean? I gave you a gift, so now you need to be nice to me, or I did you a favor, I helped you, so now you need to be nice to me, or at least you need to say thank you, or at least you need to praise me to other people. But you know, somehow I got to get something out of this. Yeah. So instead of having that mind, just the act of, you know, whatever big or small thing we do for another person, let that be the pleasurable thing. Whatever they do in response, that's not so important. Because if we can train our mind like that, then we're going to be happy, isn't it? Independent of how the other person reacts. So actually the title of this talk is, you know, our mind is the source of happiness. So this is a good example of it, you know, depending upon what kind of attitude we have. The same action can bring us happiness, or it can bring us misery. Okay? So I can, you know, do a favor for somebody, and if I'm focused on myself, what am I going to get out of it? Yeah. Then doing that action in the long term is not necessarily going to make me happy. Because even if the person praises me for doing whatever favor I did for them, they never praised me enough. Anybody ever have enough praise? Of course not. None of us have enough praise. So if we're doing it for the praise, even if somebody praises us, we're not going to have enough. We're going to feel cheated. Okay. Whereas if we just do it for the sake of the action, yeah, then there can be real joy there. And again, like I said, it doesn't need to be something huge. It can be something very small. And often, small acts of kindness affect people in very, very big ways that we're not necessarily aware of at the time. I've had experiences of, well, actually, I remember one friend of mine telling me that one time when she was going through an especially difficult time in her life when she was young, she was feeling really depressed, kind of suicidal, and she was walking down the street, and a stranger just smiled at her and kept walking. But the fact that a stranger smiled at her from the heart without wanting anything from her, the person just kept walking. But that was enough, somehow, she told me, to start her coming out of her depression and feeling like there's some goodness on this planet and there's some way I can relate to other people. And I'm sure the person who smiled at her didn't even realize that this was going to be the result of his action. Yeah. So, often just small acts of kindness can really be quite profound things that we can share with other people. So this, I think that we all want to be kind. I don't think people want to be mean. They want to be kind. But sometimes this self-centered mind gets in the way. Yeah. The self-centered mind becomes the big troublemaker. From a Buddhist perspective, human beings are not inherently selfish. Yeah. We can be selfish. We are selfish sometimes. But being selfish is not our nature. Now, some scientists may come and say, but wait a minute, it's survival of the fittest, and I want to get my genes in the gene pool, and I'm going to beat up everybody else to get my genes in the gene pool. I'm not so sure. Okay? I'm not so sure it's really survival of the fittest in all situations. Why? Because we are so interdependent that if we're always trying to trump everybody else and be number one, we're going to wind up being the only one on the planet. And how are we ever going to stay alive if we're the only one? Yeah. When you really look around, I think it's survival of the most cooperative. Think about it. Isn't our society successful because we cooperate with each other? We cooperate with each other every day, don't we? We have to cooperate with other people. Yeah. We're always giving and receiving kindness all the time. We can't exist in any other way. So it's only by cooperating and giving and receiving kindness that we manage to stay alive as individuals and as a species. So I think it's actually survival of the most cooperative, not survival of the fittest. Okay. If it's survival of the fittest, okay, take me for example. If I'm going to be the fittest, and my way is the right way, and I know everything, and I'm the big know-it-all, we're going to be in really big trouble. Because I have no idea how electricity works. I can turn on a light switch and change a light bulb, and that's it. Yeah. I have no idea how cars work. I have no idea how to construct a highway to drive the cars on, or how to build a building like this that we all sit in and enjoy. I don't know how to heal people, including myself, from illness, or fill cavities, or make bridges, whether the bridges are in here or out there. I don't know any of this stuff. So if I think I'm going to compete with everybody else and be number one, we're going to be, like I said, in really big problem. Have really big problems. It's only because other people help me that I can stay alive. I don't grow my own food. I didn't make the cloth that my clothes are made out of. I didn't make my shoes. Yeah, I didn't make the sweater. I didn't make the house that I live in. Yeah. I'm completely dependent on the kindness of other living beings for everything I have and use in my life. And all these things that I have and use are what keep me alive. So I'm actually very, very dependent on others. And all of these people who do their different jobs in society are very kind to me, because if they didn't do their jobs, I wouldn't have the benefit of whatever things that they make or services that they offer. So it's only because I rely on the kindness of others that I'm able to stay alive. And it's only because, as a group of individuals, we help and cooperate with each other that we're able to stay alive and thrive. We don't stay alive and thrive because we're the one special one that's better than everybody else. We stay alive and thrive because we're interdependent and we work together with others. And so when you really think about this, then you really see, yeah, you know, if I contribute to the well-being of one person through the ripple effects, it affects the entire society. So, you know, one act of kindness can have a lot of ramifications, just as one act of meanness can have a lot of ramifications. So we shouldn't, you know, downplay the import of our actions. Our actions are actually quite important. Quite important. And that's why it's so important to be aware of what our motivations for our actions are. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I even aware of what my motivation is? Or am I just simply acting on automatic, following whatever impulse happens to pop into my mind at any particular time? Yeah. Sometimes we talk about being spontaneous. Yeah. At least my generation did. I'm going to be spontaneous. So what does that mean? Well, anything that comes into my mind, I do. Is that wise? You know, it's not so smart to do that. Really. Because sometimes what we think is dumb. Or maybe sometimes, maybe not you. Sometimes what I think is dumb, and I get myself in big jams if I just follow whatever thought pops in my mind. Whereas if I slow down and I try and become aware of my motivation, and if I even deliberately try and cultivate a good motivation, cultivate the motivation of kindness, cultivate a compassionate, loving motivation deliberately, train the mind in that direction, then that can have very far-reaching effects on others and on myself. Okay, so that's a little sprinkling, some little seeds here of a little bit about, because it all comes back to what's going on in our mind. And our mind is the source of whether we're going to be happy or miserable. And our motivation is the chief element of what our mind is. What kind of motivation is making us act? And do we monitor our motivation? Do we try and cultivate a good motivation? Do we change our motivation if we see we have a rotten one? Okay? So these are all things to be aware and conscientious about, to act upon. So, what I'd like to do now, because I've been blah, 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 is open it up and let you ask questions and make comments and kind of address your needs and concerns. Yeah?
Question, because I've been thinking about this myself lately, which is, maybe you could speak a little bit about forgiveness as a means of compassion or a means of giving to others.
Okay, so forgiveness as an expression of compassion, or forgiveness as a way of giving to others. Yeah, it's very important. But you know who benefits the most when we give? When we forgive?
Ourselves.
Yeah, we benefit the most when we forgive. It seems like the other person is going to benefit the most. I forgive you. Yeah? But actually, we're the one who benefits the most. Because forgiving someone means that we decide we're going to stop being angry about whatever it was they did. We're just deciding, I'm fed up with being angry. My anger isn't getting me anywhere. So why continue being angry? Yeah. So forgiving is actually a gift we give to ourselves. The other person can receive some benefit from it if we forgive them. But we're actually the chief ones. So forgiving is also a way of compassion. Again, the other person is extending compassion to the other person. Whether they receive it or not, we can't control. But forgiving others is a way of having compassion for ourselves, too. Is that making some sense to you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just another point would be, in our interactions with other people in public, or with strangers, oftentimes we encounter people, something happens that one person can take offense over, and it's in those moments that if we can be kind to the other person as opposed to feeling like we have a justification for being offended.
Yeah.
But that's a gift.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So if in public interactions, even with strangers, instead of getting riled up when something happens, if we can remain calm, that is a gift we give to somebody else. Road rage is a very good example of this. Somebody cuts you off. It's very interesting. Somebody cuts you off, and then our thought is, they did it deliberately. So I can, cut them off, I can flip them off, I can, do this, that, and the other thing. It's my right because they deliberately cut me off. Okay. Now, so I have some questions. How many of you, when you're in your driving, have never cut anybody off accidentally? Yeah. Everybody, when you drive, it happens. You accidentally cut people off. Did you ever cut anybody off deliberately? Out of the blue? Just to be mean? I don't think so. So why do we assume that the other people who cut us off are doing it deliberately, and therefore we're justified in getting angry at them? You know, it doesn't make any sense. If we cut somebody else off, we're always going, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to, I didn't see you. Yeah. And then, you know, they do scream at us or whatever, and we're going, what are you so upset about? But we flip it around, and then we, you know, think, oh, yeah, go cut them off. Okay? But in actual fact, you know, extending a little bit of tolerance and patience to other people goes a long way, and it might actually prevent some accidents. I talked to one person who was a very nice young man. So it was an interesting story because he wasn't somebody that I would have looked at and instantaneously thought that this would have been something he did. But he said one time he was driving along with his fiancée in the car, and somebody cut him off, and he got just infuriated, so angry. And so he went chasing after the guy on the highway, and he cut the other guy off. And as he did so, he lost control of the car, went across 4 lanes in the highway, and wound up, you know, almost in the ditch by the time he stopped. And he realized that he almost killed his fiancée by his road rage. Yeah. And that made him really stop and think about, you know, is anger useful? Or would a little bit of patience and tolerance have been much kinder, especially the person he loves? Yeah.
I have a question about identity. You speak of being compassionate to others, and something that's kind of getting at me is, just because I say that I am compassionate doesn't mean that I am compassionate.
Right.
So how are we to view ourselves? How are we to view the individual that we see ourselves as? I mean, it's really broad, but...
Yeah, when you're asking how do we view ourselves, because you said we may say I'm compassionate, but that doesn't mean we are compassionate. Yeah. So how do we view ourselves? Okay, I'll talk in one way, and then you can tell me if this is the area you were thinking about, because like you said, there's a whole broad way. I would say to see ourselves honestly. Yeah, to see our talents and our good qualities without being arrogant about them, but know that they're there and know that we can use them to benefit others. And to be honest about our faults and shortcomings, because everybody else knows we have them, so what use is it denying that we do? Yeah? And so to see, okay, I have some good qualities, I have some shortcomings. I'm not a fixed, solid personality. I can change. So I can work with my shortcomings and, you know, learn to think in a different way, learn to act in a different way. And there's techniques that I can, you know, follow. There's teachers who can show me how to do this. And so therefore, you know, having faults is not something horrible and terrible. It's reality, and then we do something about them. We don't have to criticize ourselves and hate ourselves because we have faults. That making some sense? Yeah? It's like, yeah, I have lots of faults. And you know what? Everybody else knows what my faults are. The people I live with, you ask them, and they'll tell you what my faults are. They all know. So for me to go around and say, Oh, I have no faults. What kind of stupidagio is that? Yeah? You know, it's like going around, I don't have a nose. I have a big nose. It's there. Everybody sees it. No, I don't have a big nose. Come on. It's there. Okay? So it doesn't mean we're bad people. It doesn't mean we're failures. Yeah, we're all in the same boat, aren't we? We all have some good qualities. We all have some problems. We're exactly like everybody else. So we work on our problems. We improve our shortcomings. We try and enhance our good qualities. We do what we can to be of benefit and service to others. And then we feel at peace in our own hearts. You know, I did what I could. I tried. Yeah, with a good heart, with a kind motivation. I did what I'm capable of at any particular moment. I don't have to be Mother Teresa. I don't have to be Dalai Lama. Yeah, I just have to do what I'm capable of doing and continually increase my ability to give. And that's good. Yeah.
Is that feeling of deliberately creating a compassionate attitude enough to take away your upsettedness at the way the world actually is sometimes? The fact that we spend money on bombs instead of education and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because I have trouble with that.
Okay. So it's just having compassion kind of enough to counteract the almost sense of despair we have sometimes at the way the world is. You know, let me just talk for a minute about this sense of despair we have. I think that the media cultivates that sense of despair in us. Yeah. What kind of stories does the media report? Yeah. Horrible stories. Does the media report stories of kindness? Rarely. But it tells us, you know, battles and killings and, you know, the political situation, blah, blah. And we get hyped up, we get some kind of rush about all of that. But at the same time, it makes us feel despair. But when we really look at the world, yes, all those things are happening. But there also is a lot of kindness and goodness going on. Yeah. On a day-to-day basis, we are all the recipients of other people's kindness. Aren't we? You know, you go buy something at the supermarket, you're a recipient of the kindness of the person at the checkout counter who helped you make your purchase. Yeah. You drive a car, you're the recipient of the kindness of all the people who built the car. So I think we have to train our mind also to see the goodness in the world and not let the media control us. And to see the goodness in the world, to see the goodness in others, and to act with as much compassion as we have. And it may not be perfect, but that's okay. We're doing something. So I think this thing of, you know, falling into despair about the state of the planet, that doesn't benefit anybody at all, except the people who make the drugs for depression. Yeah. But it doesn't, you know, being full of despair doesn't do anything. And also, like I said, there is actually a whole lot of kindness in this world. I talked to somebody, because I have a lot of opportunity to hear different people's stories, you know, when I travel and teach and things. And what year was it when the electricity went out in New York City? Was it 1968 or sometime? But the whole electricity went out in New York City. And this person was in the subway underground when the electricity went out. Do you remember when that happened? Yeah? And, I mean, New York City is... Anyway, she said they were all stuck underground in the dark. And she said that just people held hands. You had no idea whose hand you were holding, but people held hands and led each other through the tunnel of the subway until they got to some place where they could go up above ground. And she said it was the most remarkable experience because here were all these people, all different kinds of people, who maybe you would, you know, never want to see again. But at that moment, everybody was working together and helping each other. You know? And that's possible. And, you know, and maybe after that experience, you might want to see some of those people again. You had a question?
Yes. You know, you made the comment in your talk about this is learned behavior, talking about we're going to bomb you till you love me, type of thing. As you look back in history, back to the Crusades, etc., before that, mankind has always had this tension, for lack of a better word, back to basically when mankind came into existence. Is there a possibility that maybe some of this tension, anger, bomb you till you love me, is genetic?
Okay, so there's this tendency towards hostility, genetic. Well, we do have, you know, I have some difficulty with saying that our behavior is caused by genetics, by genes, okay? I'm willing to say that our behavior is influenced by our body. Yeah. I'm willing to say that the body and mind influence each other. But personally speaking, I'm not really willing to say that our behavior is genetically, that our behavior in terms of things like hostility and so forth is genetically there. You know, some desire energy, maybe like sexual desire, that has something to do with genes and chemicals in your body and stuff like that. Whether hostility does, I'm not completely convinced, okay? And I have some concern about our tendency now to say that all of our behavior and our feelings are because of our genes and because of what's happening in our brain. Because I think going that route makes us feel that human beings are simply material beings and that consciousness doesn't exist. That how we act, what we are, is just due to atoms and molecules and chemical interactions. And that leads us to a very dangerous place of therefore I have no personal responsibility for my emotions, for my thoughts, for my behavior, because it's due to my genes, or it's due to my brain chemistry. And I think that that is very dangerous. Yeah, to think that we don't have personal responsibility. Now, like I say, I do think that our body does influence our mind, you know, and genes, of course, are part of our body. There could be something there. But I don't think that having the attitude that everything is genetically determined or chemically determined is helpful or realistic. Okay. So you may say I'm nuts. That's okay. Because then you just say I have nutty genes. Then I have no personal responsibility for being nuts. So you can't blame me. You can't blame me. You have to blame my genes. Other questions? Yeah.
Venerable, I have found myself repeatedly mostly in work environments where I see people struggling and I have the skills or the knowledge to help them and I offer to help. And then as time goes on, it becomes an expectation and then it becomes a demand. And then I find where there's only 8 hours in a work day, and how can I possibly do all these things that people have now come to expect? And I don't know from a Buddhist perspective, how do you put the brakes on that expectation? And because I end up getting resentful. Like, okay, it wasn't enough that I helped you when I was able to help you, now you're just, you know, why aren't you doing this? And you know, so then I end up having a workload that exponentially grows beyond my ability to deal with it.
Okay. So you reach out and help somebody who needs help, then they come to expect it, and they demand it, and then you are overwhelmed. The word, sorry, I can't do this. You know, those words exist. The word no exists.
They don't like to hear it though.
That's okay. You know, you can say no in a kind way. It doesn't have to be, no, get off my back, why are you demanding so much stuff? It can be, you know, I was very happy to help you when I could, but I also have a lot of work that I need to do. I'm really sorry that I can't help you with this particular thing. I can show you maybe where you can learn how to do it. Or I can organize a class. If a lot of people are having this problem, I can organize a class and teach everybody how to resolve it.
I made that offer. Didn't go over very well, I have to tell
Yeah,
you.
but you know, see, being kind doesn't mean everybody has to be happy with you. We get confused this way. We think that kindness and compassion and love mean that everybody's going to be happy with us. Don't think that. Because sometimes the kindest, most compassionate things you can do for other people are going to make them totally infuriated. Yeah. When you tell somebody with substance abuse that you're not going to loan them money, that you're going to take them to drug rehab, they're not going to go, oh, how kind you are. You know? But you're doing the best thing, the most compassionate thing for them when you say that. Yeah? So don't think that you have to make everybody in this world happy. That's impossible. It's impossible to make everybody happy. Nobody can make everybody happy. Why? Because we make ourselves happy. We don't make other people happy. We make ourselves happy. We can do things that set the circumstance that maybe somebody will be happy, but they're the ones who decide whether they're going to be happy or not. We can't control that. So if people are unhappy, sometimes you just have to live with it, what to do. You know, somebody else being unhappy is not our responsibility. Our mean behavior is our responsibility. Our inconsiderate, corrupt, selfish motivation is our responsibility. Okay? But our our bad motivation doesn't necessarily mean somebody else is going to be happy. Sometimes we act like with a rotten motivation and we succeed in manipulating somebody and they're delighted. Yeah? Sometimes we act with a good motivation, with real kindness and care, and the other person is really ticked off. Okay, we can't control that. We have to be centered ourselves and, communicate effectively. And sometimes people are unhappy with us, and we can have compassion for them that they're miserable. But, if we wanted to make them miserable, then we have some work to do on ourselves. But if we weren't deliberately trying to cause them suffering, then we just have to endure that. Okay, let's sit quietly for a couple of minutes. I call this digestion time. It'll just be 2 or 3 minutes. But what we do during this time is think about what you heard. Okay? Just think about what you heard and how, so that you can hold it in your mind and take it home with you. Okay? Just 2 or 3 minutes. And then let's rejoice at the fact that we were able to share together this evening and really think about some worthwhile things. And let's rejoice at the good energy we created in our own hearts and minds and the good energy that everybody here created and what we created together as a group. And then let's dedicate all that wonderful energy and send it out into the universe. You can even think of it as rays of lights coming from the center of our chest. And send out all this good energy so that it touches everybody else and really brings peace in their bodies and minds. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Venerable. We hope you'll come again.
I'll come again if you come again. It's interdependent.